before you got here, I looked up the definition and all that it said was chronic pain of the vagina. And it didn't say anything else. Like when I Googled it, it just said chronic pain of the vagina could last 3 months.
Okay, that's very reductive, definitely.
Yeah, yes.
Chronic pain of the vagina is, the vagina is like literally the birth canal, like the vaginal canal.
Yes.
Vulvodynia, it's like in the definition. So the suffix dynia means pain in the medical field. So vulvodynia, pain of the vulva. So the vulva can be like the entire, not just the vagina, it's the entire like female anatomy essentially, externally.
Yeah, that is what I figured based on what I already knew about it, but found it strange that that was the definition that came up when I typed it into Google.
Yeah. I think the can last 3 months part, though, is a little bit helpful because, if it's just like something that happens once, like it's probably not going to be diagnosed as vulvodynia. But if it persists for 3 months or longer, then it's generally like recognized as a chronic pain condition, essentially. But I would back it up a little bit to sort of define vulvodynia. So first you have dyspareunia, which is just a general, like super general, super broad umbrella term, which just means pain with sexual intercourse. So pain with penetration. And then underneath that, you have vulvodynia, which we mentioned is pain of the vulva. But then under vulvodynia is also an umbrella term. Specifically, I've been diagnosed with provoked vestibulodynia. Do you know what the vestibule is?
No.
Okay, so like, what a vestibule of a building is, like an entryway to a building. So the vestibule is just the entryway to the vagina. So where things go in, where a penis would go in, or a finger, or a tampon, or a toy, or whatever. So vestibulodynia is pain of the vestibule. And provoked vestibulodynia just means it's only painful when provoked. So only painful when touched or when you attempt penetration.
So not painful when you're just sitting or walking or doing anything else.
No, that would be unprovoked vestibulodynia, which some people do have, which I can't imagine.
Yeah, like, that's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible as is, but like just it's even worse.
So let's back up and just talk about, so we know kind of what the definition might be, but you have some things to reference as well. But overall in this conversation, we want to talk about your experience with it, what you've been doing to help, and if it is helping, and kind of what you would say to other people who are experiencing it.
Yeah. So I think just one other thing I want to touch upon for like in terms of the definition is vestibulodynia is so hard to diagnose. The most common causes of vestibulodynia are hormonal conditions, tight pelvic floor muscles, inflammation, or an increased number of nerve endings, which can be caused by a number of different things. So it's really, really hard to get a diagnosis and get the right diagnosis, and therefore hard to get the right treatment.
That's really challenging. And I think part of the reason I wanted you to come in is because I feel like people don't talk about this. And if they do, I think oftentimes when you go to the doctor, you're written off as like, oh, you'll be fine, or this just happens, it'll go away. And there's not like necessarily a root cause that they'll identify. And you have to go to all of these specialists just like you have to figure it out, which is a lot of time and money and energy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have statistics, but like it is a really common condition that people just don't talk about. And like women do get brushed off in the doctor's office constantly. I was told by several different doctors when I was sort of like doctor shopping, like, oh, just use lube or try to relax. I'm like, that's not the issue. Like, you don't think we've tried that? Like, we've tried everything. But eventually I had to seek out I basically self-diagnosed, first of all. So
when you first noticed this, how long ago was it and how did you notice it?
Yeah, so I've been with my partner since like late 2019, and we had a happy, healthy, normal sex life from late 2019 to summer 2021. And then all of a sudden, sex hurt every single time we tried to have like sexual intercourse. It hurt. And it wasn't, and I started doing my own research and I found out what vulvodynia was by looking online. And that self-diagnosis sort of allowed me to seek out like the right kind of doctors, because my normal gynecologist and my normal doctor were kind of at a loss and didn't really know how to help me. So I ended up seeing a pelvic pain specialist in September of 2021 in New York City, who I won't name because it wasn't a very helpful experience. But that was like sort of my first like formal diagnosis of vulvodynia.
And then when you got that diagnosis, did that feel like a relief to you to get the diagnosis? Or do you think that it was like, okay, cool, I have this diagnosis, but nothing is really changing?
It felt like a relief initially. So, as I mentioned, there can be like a lot of different causes of vulvodynia or vestibulodynia. And I have like a long history of recurring yeast infections, which is also something that people definitely don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
And are so common, and it's just taboo to talk about women's bodies in general, which sucks, but here we are doing it.
Yeah.
But she heard that I had a history of recurrent yeast infections and was like, okay, so I think yours is caused by damage to your nerves in the vestibule. So I'm going to give you this topical treatment, which included, this sounds so weird. So it was like an ointment that included amitriptyline, which is an antidepressant medication.
Oh.
Gabapentin, which is an anti-seizure medication, and baclofen, which is a muscle relaxant. And so I was supposed to just put that on every night at bedtime, and things were supposed to get better. And I was also supposed to do pelvic floor physical therapy. I ended up doing both for about a year and finding absolutely no relief. Like, things weren't really getting better. And I kept going back to her, and she just kind of kept telling me to like keep on keeping on with the same treatments, but nothing was really working. So that's sort of when I decided to bite the bullet and go see Dr. Andrew Goldstein, who is based in New York City, and he's kind of like, he's like famous in the world of vulvodynia as like the top-notch doctor who treats this condition and like has experience in diagnosing the root cause and treating the root cause.
During this time, you weren't having sexual intercourse at all, would you say? Or were you trying and it just wasn't working, and then that was sort of the way that you went about it for about that whole year?
We were definitely trying, and it was definitely hurting a lot of the time. And so if it hurt, we would stop. But we definitely had to find like other ways to be intimate because, you know, like, I'm 26, like I should be able to have like a happy, normal sex life without any pain. And so should my partner. And we had that at once. And so to lose that was like really challenging. So
what do you think it meant for you as a woman to not be able to access that part of your sexuality and your sexual experience?
It was so challenging. Like, I got down on myself a lot about it. Like, it made me feel really bad about my body. Like, my brain wants one thing, but my body isn't listening to what my brain wants, isn't allowing me to like get what I want, essentially.
Sure.
So it really sucked. And it was really, really hard not to like honestly get depressed about it at times. I'm in a much, much better place now. But for that year where there was just no improvement, it was really, really challenging for both of us. But I'm really lucky to have a really loving and supportive partner who has been with me through this journey. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, there's times where we have both gotten really frustrated with it.
Yeah, I think it's only natural to be frustrated at that when you both really want something and want to be close in that way.
Yeah. And then for me too, it just like, because sex hurt, it also just made my sex drive like drop so much. And like that was just so abnormal for me.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine that it would just make you not even want to try at some point if it always is feeling that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So it did kind of get to that point, but, with therapy and talking about it with friends and stuff, like, we just sort of always tried to find other ways to be intimate
Mhm.
and sort of just get around it. And in that way it like brought us closer too, and that like we had and have a really open dialogue about, my body, his body, like what works, what doesn't.
That's, I mean, so important. It should exist in any sexual relationship
Yeah.
and partnership, but especially in this case, I think it's really important.
Yeah.
So you went to the specialist, and what was that like? What was kind of the initial consultation? And then are you still seeing that person today?
So to see Dr. Andrew Goldstein is like a feat in and of itself.
Mhm.
So he has two locations. He's in New York City and he's also in Washington, D.C. He splits his time. In New York, he's the only doctor, but in DC, he has a female doctor there as well. So I saw him in New York City. There was a really long waiting list. I think I asked to see him in like September of 2022. I was told I couldn't be seen until February of 2023. But I got a phone call like one morning in December, right before Christmas, saying like, we have an opening. Do you want to come in? And I was like, yes, I'm going to come in. I'm going to drop everything and come in. Um, and so I went in. It's in Midtown in New York in just a little office building. And it's just him and one of his assistants who's there. And it was unlike any doctor's appointment I've ever been to in that I filled out a questionnaire like a few days before that took me about an hour. It was really, really in depth about my entire history. And then before you even go into like the exam room, you just go sit in his office, like his like office where he does work, and you sit and you have a conversation about
Mhm.
what's been going on, and his assistant's there the whole time too as well. And he just like really listens to you, which a lot of doctors don't.
Yeah.
So that was really, really great. So we had like a half-hour long conversation before we moved to the exam room, and I got undressed from the waist down. And again, his assistant is there the whole time, which helped to make me feel even more comfortable. Um, and then he does what's called the Q-tip test,
Mhm.
which is, if you have vulvodynia, you probably know what it is. If you don't, it's good to know what it is. It's essentially they take like an oversized Q-tip. It's about this big, and
Mhm.
they just touch around the opening of the vestibule, so the
Yeah.
opening of the vagina. And they say, "Does this hurt? Does this hurt? Does this hurt?" On a scale of
Mhm.
1 to 10, rate it. Um, so he did that, and then he does an internal exam to
Mhm.
check your muscles to see if your pelvic floor muscles are causing any of the pain. Um, and based on the Q-tip test, that sounds so funny to say, but based on the Q-tip test, he thought that mine was caused by a hormonal issue, which he then ended up taking blood before I left to test my hormones. Um, and then based on the internal exam, he told me that my pelvic floor muscles were really, really, really tight.
Okay.
Basically, yeah. Basically, he explained that, like, because I've been dealing with this for a year and a half, my muscles are now in like protective mode.
Mhm.
So they're always tense. And when they're always tense, there's a decrease in blood flow to the area and therefore a decrease in oxygen. He compared it to like working out and then being really sore the next day because you worked those muscles so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Basically, my vagina is like always working out like really hard. Or not my vagina, my pelvic floor muscles are always working really hard, so they're always like really sore the next day. So
Which is
they're always just sore.
impacting your vulva
Yeah.
entirely.
Yeah. So, and then I got my hormone results back as well, and my testosterone is just extremely low. And did you know women like needed testosterone?
No.
Yeah. So I didn't really know that either. We do need testosterone, not as much as men, obviously,
Mhm.
but we need a certain amount. And whereas mine should have been, I forget what units of measurement he used, but I should have been like around like a 14. I was around a 2.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So not good. So his treatment for me was like 3 months of topical hormone cream with testosterone and a little bit of estrogen mixed in there. And then after that 3 months, he wanted me to start doing pelvic floor physical therapy. And I was like, I already did that and it didn't help. He was like, yeah, you need good physical therapy with myofascial release. Do you know what myofascial release is?
So many big words.
I know. It's like so convoluted and like scientific, I feel like. But myofascial release, it can apply to like any form of PT, but it's just basically manual massage of the muscle to help it relax.
Okay.
So basically manual internal work in your pelvic floor to help those muscles relax, as well as dilator work. So it was a combination of that. And then this is going to sound insane, but in order to tolerate the physical therapy and the dilator work, he wanted me to use Valium suppositories, which sounds insane, but Valium is a muscle relaxant. And because of the location of like my specific pelvic floor muscles that were so tight, the best way for the Valium to reach that area was to have it be a rectal suppository.
Oh, interesting.
So TMI, right? Yeah.
I mean, all of this sounds, one, really challenging itself. Two, a lot of time and energy and thought that goes into even considering these treatments and then to do them.
Yeah, definitely.
But do you feel like they're helping? Do you feel like it's like a difference from the previous person that you went to?
Yeah. So after the 3 months of just the hormone treatment, I was already like starting to feel a little better, and we were able to have we kept trying occasionally to have like sexual intercourse, and we were able to have it like a couple times, like without too much pain, or like I would tolerate it and then it would get better. And so by the time like physical therapy rolled around, I felt like ready to do the dilator work and do the myofascial release work. And I found Dr. Goldstein gave me a list of good physical therapists in New York that he recommended. And of course, like none of them take insurance. Dr. Goldstein doesn't take insurance either. I'm like really lucky to be in a position of privilege that I can afford these things and like have some out of network benefits with my health insurance through work. But, I shopped around like with this list of physical therapists he gave me, and I found 5 Point Physical Therapy, which is in Flatiron in New York. And I work with Annie Neeson there, and she is just so wonderful, like especially compared to the last physical therapy experience I had. Like she makes me feel so comfortable and relaxed, and just like I can talk to her about anything. Whereas with like in the past, I felt just kind of weird and tense, which is the opposite of what you want when you're doing that.
You want to be relaxed and feel comfortable and calm, and otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah, because it's a really vulnerable experience. Like,
I mean, going to the gynecologist is a vulnerable experience. Like, I can't imagine this also.
Yeah. And so it's been weekly. It's been like 3 months now, I think, of the Valium with the physical therapy sessions weekly. And I'm like, I don't want to jinx it and say like I'm totally healed, but I'm so much better in that I can have sex with my partner. And even if it hurts like initially, like I have the coping mechanisms now to like breathe through the pain, help myself relax, work with him to help me relax. I have the tools and the knowledge of like different positions that we can like try that will help minimize the pain, that will relax my muscles. So I'm feeling a lot better, and I don't want to jinx that, but things are getting better. But it could be a lifelong thing. Like there could be some level of maintenance with like dilator work that I'll have to do for the rest of my life. Maybe, or maybe not. I don't know.
And hopefully, as time goes on, there will be more research and knowledge available to the general public about vulvodynia and kind of how you can combat it if you do have it. I mean, it seems like individually cases are much different from each other. And we know that the vulva is very complicated and there's a lot we don't know about it. So I think it's really cool that you could go to this specialist and he could help you. And it speaks volumes that his wait list was so long.
I'm not affiliated with him in any way, but he and his team wrote this wonderful book. It's called When Sex Hurts, Understanding and Healing Pelvic Pain. And he basically goes through like his whole process that he and his team have developed. And he addresses like everything I just addressed, but he also addresses all of the other causes of pelvic pain because there's so many other causes of pelvic pain. So if you're not near him and you can't see him or find someone like him in your area, I would 100% recommend like getting his book and reading it. Because you just have to educate yourself really and like be an advocate for yourself. And this is like a good starting point at least. And like you said, you looked it up on Google and it wasn't very helpful.
Yeah, it wasn't. And I think the point of advocating for yourself as a woman in healthcare is so, I mean, I talk to so many women and it doesn't matter what it's about. We have to advocate for ourselves so much harder than a lot of other people in the world because we aren't believed oftentimes. And I think it's wonderful that he has a book that kind of validates experiences and you can go to somebody like that and he'll listen to you. Do you think the book was helpful for you? Like,
I didn't get the book until after I saw him.
Oh, okay.
So this is like a revised and updated version. There's an older version as well that I actually didn't know about until I saw him. But I did read it and it was helpful just to reiterate what he had told me and sort of just like have a reference to go back to. And I should mention, it's not just his book. He wrote it with a team. He wrote it with his female counterpart in DC, as well as a woman with a PhD in, I believe, psychiatry. And ironically, the other famous doctor for treating vulvodynia is also Dr. Goldstein, but Dr. Erwin Goldstein, and he's in California.
That's confusing.
Yeah, it's very confusing. But they wrote it as a team. And
I think that's really cool.
Yeah. It's been super helpful for sure. And he pulls in like they pull in women and their specific experiences as well, which is nice too.
Yeah. I think that's really cool. What other book did you have?
Yeah, I brought this other book because it's called The Camera My Mother Gave Me, which I still haven't quite figured out like why it's called that. But have you heard of Girl Interrupted?
Yes.
Or seen the movie?
Yeah.
The movie's actually based on a memoir by Susanna Kaysen, who is the author of this book. And it's written a long time ago, like I think in the 90s, where like they knew nothing about vulvodynia. I don't even think the term vulvodynia is like referenced in here, but it's all about painful sex and her experience with it. And it was just so... This I read before I saw him, before I saw Dr. Goldstein. And it was just huge in like helping me like find a source of empathy almost, because like none of my friends were going through this, but like here's this woman's accounting of what happened to her with it before it was even really like explored in the medical field in any real way. So I would recommend reading that as well, even though it's a bit like outdated now.
As we said, women aren't talking about this as much. If they're your age, especially, and going through this, they might feel ashamed to talk about it. It might seem taboo. I even think if you're an older woman and you are going through this, you might not want to publicly talk about it. And that's why I think it's so important to say, like, read that book or have a conversation with friends. And if one person can feel less alone, I think that's great.
Yeah, and that also makes me think of there's Facebook groups for vulvodynia, and I want to like say if you are experiencing this, you should definitely check them out and join them, but like do so with caution because it can be helpful to like have a community of people who have this talking about it. You can chat with other people who have it. I've even like spoken one-on-one in like Facebook messages with some of them. But you can also doom scroll and hear about people who have had this for 14 years and never gotten any better, or like people just venting, which can get like emotionally exhausting to just scroll through that. So
there's a balance.
There's definitely a balance to strike with those, but they're also helpful. And that's actually where I heard about Dr. Goldstein too.
Oh, that's a perfect example of how it can be really light and helpful and good.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas just doom scrolling forever, I'm sure that doesn't feel very great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also wanted to say at the beginning of this, and I forgot to say it, but we are not medical professionals.
Yes, we are not medical
we
professionals.
are just talking about Heather's experience, and I think that's important to say just in general.
Yes.
But yeah, I really appreciate you coming and talking about this. I know it's not an easy subject, but I'm glad to hear that you're feeling so much better, and I hope that it continues and you're able to kind of figure out your path through this journey.
I also hope the healing continues. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm happy you came in, and I hope that women who are listening feel less alone in their struggle after listening.
They are definitely not alone.
Yeah.